Job didn't think he had any. And when you don't think you have any, you don't, as far as you're concerned. And that's a tragic, tragic feeling. I've never had it. I've gotten close, but I've never had the feeling that I had no friend. I don't know what I'd do. I might commit suicide like Job's wife counseled him to do if I got to the point that Job got to. The purpose of the book is so that I don't have to do that. The purpose of the book is to reveal to me that even when it seems as if no one cares, someone does. When it seems like everything is against me, it isn't. That's always an impaired vision. You remember old Jacob when he thought that Joseph was dead and Simeon was dead and Benjamin was going to die? He said, all these things are against me. He was wrong, but that's what he believed. He believed that everything in all the world was against him. He forgot that in the darkness there's a light. You know, there's a little old poem that says, truth forever upon the scaffold and wrong forever upon the throne. But behind the dim unknown stands God, keeping watch over his own. Now, Job will know that at the end of the day. He doesn't know that on the trash heap. He doesn't know that when he's rejected by the community. He doesn't know that when he's rejected by his wife. He doesn't know that when he's rejected by his friends. He doesn't know that the end of the day will bring light. We want to see that tonight. We looked at the friend's approach last night, and I wish you'd been here if you weren't here, because a lot of what I'm going to say is built on that. His friends and Job have a concept about God that we call the theory of retribution. They believe that God would punish them for every wicked thing done immediately, and that God would reward them for every good thing done immediately. They thought that every good thing issued in prosperity now between the womb and the tomb, and every wicked thing issued in punishment and judgment right now between the womb and the tomb. They thought that God had to settle everything between birth and death because they did not believe in the afterlife. They believed in an after existence. We're going to look at that tonight. Job does not believe. Now, he may have a dream of an afterlife, but his steadfast belief is that he goes to a place from which he shall not return, dark as midnight, where there is no life, no light, no order, nor no calling of God to mind. And he still stayed faithful. I agree with God. He has no one like him. Not in the Old or the New Testament except for Christ does he have a man with the personal integrity that this man Job had. We must face the problem of human suffering. If you haven't been here, I've got to say just a word or two about that, and then we'll get right into the lesson for the sake of those of us who've been here each night. We must face the problem of human suffering. No way we can get away from it. History, with its wars, its pestilence, the barbarity of man to man, makes it without a doubt the fact that the innocent folk suffer, and that calls the belief of a good God into question. There are mysteries in evil, as there are mysteries in good. And the place for the man of God is to wait in submission for the answer of God. But not many of us have the ability to wait in submission for the answer of God when we're in the midst of the trouble. When we have leprosy, as Job did, from the top of our head to the bottom of our feet, when our skin is black and falling off our bones, as he said his was in chapter 30, when maggots and worms are eating his flesh and have done so for months, he says in chapter 30 and in chapter 7, when he's feverish so much that in the morning time or in the daylight he longs for the coolness of the night, and the coolness of the night he has chills and he longs for the warmth of the morning. When he cannot close his eyelids, he has to have his eyelids open 24 hours a day because his eyes open, 24 hours a day because of the swollen character of his eyes. He cannot sleep. He doesn't desire food. He has no desire for his wife. He has no desire for life. We're not dealing with suffering in the abstract. That's where philosophers and preachers like to deal with suffering, is in the abstract. We're dealing with suffering in the concrete. Job is one big, great, incarnate question mark. Why? Why am I suffering? Why has this come upon me? And he will never get the answer to that question. It is a presumptuous question. It is a question that does not need to be answered. The question, why is God doing this, will never be answered either. But it's more likely the proper question. The real question is, what can I learn from all of this? And that's the question that's hard to ask, isn't it, in the midst of suffering? What does God intend in all of this for me? What does He want me to see? What does He want to accomplish in my life in the midst of all this suffering? Well, to get at that, I've got 8 charts, and I have no idea we'll get through them, and we're going to finish this lesson tomorrow night, probably. I want us to look, first of all, at Job's concept of his friend's comfort. You know, I'm using comfort there sort of like it is in the whiskey, southern comfort. I doubt very seriously that's much comfort. And that's the way Job felt about his friends. He said in chapter 6, you might want to just thumb through your Bible as we look at these and look at these texts. We're not going to read them all, because if we do, there's no way we'll get through this first chart. But in Job 6 and verse 15 and following, Job says that his friends are like a deceitful brook. You know what a deceitful brook is? It's like a New Mexico arroyo, or a West Texas draw, or a Tennessee wash. In the rainy season, when you don't need any water, it's bank to bank. You know, but in the dry season where you really would like to have a drink, and you remember that 4 miles ahead you saw water when you were by here last time in the winter, and you hurry on, it's July, and you can scratch a match on the top of on the roof of your mouth. You know, it's just full of cotton, and you think, well, just over the hill, I recognize that tree. It's there by the brook. And you get there, and all it is sand. That's a deceitful brook. When you don't need the help, it has plenty. But when you need the help, it has none. Now, honestly, brothers and sisters, that's the way we are with one another way too many times. When everything's going good and everything's up here and we're all on the mountain peak, we can sing, Jesus loves me, this I know, and if Jesus goes with me, I'll go, and how sweet it is to be in Jesus, and there is a golden tie that binds our heart in Christian love. But then when the brother is seen to be fallen into sin, where's all that love? Where's all that care? Where's all that concern? Or do we say, well, I knew he wouldn't stand anyway, never was much to him. If he'd really been a strong Christian, that wouldn't have happened. Well, of course that's true. Of course that's true. But Job's the strongest man in the world, and it's happened to him. I mean, he is seen by the community and his friends and his wife and himself to be at the bottom of the barrel. He is in the lowest valley of valleys. He is the sinner of sinners. He is the chief of all the sinners in the world of his day in the eyes of everybody around him, and his friends have no water for his thirst. They have no comfort for his trouble. He says they're unmerciful in chapter 6 and in verse 27. I want to read that verse. He says, yea, ye would cast lots upon the fatherless and make merchandise of your friends. He says, your comfort is as worthless as the slave dealer selling orphans or the slave buyer buying orphans. Said you're casting lots upon the fatherless, either to sell him or to buy the only possession he has. You are unmerciful. He says in chapter 12, verse 2, they were the vox populi. Says, no doubt ye are but the people. You are the voice of the people. And wisdom will die with you. I'm afraid many times that's what the best we've got is just the latest book written by somebody who's supposed to know something. All we have is the voice of the people. It bothers me when we read more about the Bible than we do from the Bible. It bothers me when we read more theological books than we do books about the theos, the book about the theos, about God. It bothers me when we believe we've got to know all of the latest problems and sins and false doctrines that face mankind, when all the people really need to hear, "Sir, we would see Jesus." You're the people. I hear in your advice the same advice I hear from those that don't believe in God, is what Job is telling his friends. And I'm afraid many times that's what we offer one another. In the fourth place, he called them forgers of lies and physicians of no value in 13 verse 4. Moffat in his translation says, "You are the chief maker of lies, and you are quacks." I mean, he got down to the 20th century word. They were quacks. On the corner of Garland Road and something, Fitzhugh, Gaston and Fitzhugh, it becomes Garland Road. On the corner of Gaston and Fitzhugh in Dallas, Texas, was a big old 3-story house, and it was called somebody's clinic. I won't call the name. I don't want to open myself for libel. And the fella had a cure for cancer. You know, I was a young boy. Cancer had just been discovered. I don't know if it started or not, but we just discovered it. And this guy had a cure for cancer, and people come from all over the world, and he'd x-ray them, and he'd give them some pills and pronounce them cured, and they'd go home and die of cancer. He was a physician of no value. He was a quack. And that's what Job says his friends are. Your advice sounds good, but it's absolutely nothing but sugar pills. It doesn't get down to the real problem. All you're doing is quoting me passages that don't apply to my situation. All you're doing is making interpretation of truth that does not apply to my situation. It might apply somewhere else, but my heart and my mind and my integrity tell me that what you say is wrong, and therefore it can't be from God. He says you're miserable comforters. Miserable comforters are you all in 16:2. He says in 17:10, "Come on and talk to me. I will not find a wise man among you." There's no wisdom there. He says they're mockers. In 21 verse 3, he says, "Let me talk for a while. I know you want to talk, but would you please just be quiet and let me talk till I finish, and then mock on." He knows what they'll do. They'll pay no attention to what he's saying. They'll give no credence to his view because they've already made up their mind what God would have them to say, and therefore they will not listen to what Job has to say. You ever been in a discussion with somebody, a talk, an argument, whatever you want to call it, with somebody, and they're making some points, and you're just patting your foot, getting yours all outlined, what you're going to say? You ever do that, Klein? No. What else will you lie about? We've all done that. That's a common human experience. And that's what they are doing. They're not paying any attention to what Job is saying, because what Job is telling them is, your position doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, it's not right. Not everything that works is right, but everything that's right works. And your way doesn't work, and therefore it isn't right. He says you say the wicked always prosper. Well, now, if you're ignorant enough to believe that, ask the wayfaring man. Talk to him. He goes around the world, and he'll tell you how it is. Wicked men prosper. If you don't believe that, ask somebody that travels. Now, that's really a slander to them, because one of them's come 1,000 miles, probably on the back of some smelly camel, just to comfort Job. So these are traveling men. And he says, look, if you don't know any better than what you're saying, ask the traveling man. And then he presents him a challenge in 24 and verse 25. He's just about through talking to them. In the last series, he doesn't talk to them much. He just talks to God. And in 24 verse 25, Job says, "And if it be not so, if what I'm saying, that the wicked do prosper and the righteous do really suffer, if it be not so, who will prove me a liar and make my speech nothing worth?" He said, if I'm wrong, just prove it. Just prove I'm wrong. Don't just say, Job, you're wrong. That doesn't prove anything. Nobody has the right to speak ex cathedra except the one who really sits on the throne. He's the only one, isn't he? He speaks and no one has the right to question. My interpretation may be wrong, but that doesn't make what he said wrong. He's the only one with the right to speak and not prove it. God doesn't have to prove it. Anyone else that speaks about what he believes God said has to prove that that is what God said. Not just that he believes that that's what God said. Not just that that's his interpretation of what God says. But he's got to just keep reading that passage to me again and again and again, and reading cognate passages again and again and again, and showing me experiences in my life and the life of other people in application to that text again and again and again, until he's proven his point, until I say, now I see. That's what God says. And then that Greek word, eureka, comes into play. I found it. Belongs to me now. What were you? You were just somebody just saying, here it is, Richard. And I said, there it is, Richard. There it is. There it is. You just got to keep that text there. Not some system there. But that text there, that plainly read and plainly understood by plain men in plain English, says that plain truth. And that's what his friends had not done. Then he has a concept of, what did I do with the concept of God? Here it is. Then he has a concept of God that's a little bit different, but not much different than the concept of his friends. You've got to remember again what we said the first night and repeated last night. Job lives in a dark room. He doesn't have a lot of revelation. And God will say he hadn't said the truth. But then he will say of the three friends, you've not done as good as Job. Job did the best there was to do in that day. And here's the best man with a meager revelation of God can do. Job said in chapter 6, verse 4, that his arrows are in me. His poison is in my system. His terrors fill my heart. My lot, Job's lot from God, Job's inheritance from God was arrows and poison and terrors. I meet with brothers and sisters like that around the country who really believe that they are cursed by God. That's what Job believed. Job thought that God was a spy on man. In chapter 7, verse 20, Job says, if I sin against you, what is that to you, O thou watchman upon all mankind? Or as Moffat says, thy spy on all mankind. A watchman is a fellow that stands and looks for coming enemies. And God is spying out. I've never liked the song, there's an all-seeing eye watching you. And I think maybe it's because of this text right here, or the thought of this text, because that makes God a spy, a big bully with a big stick, waiting for your first mistake so that, bam, down comes the stick. That's the theory of retribution, and that's what Job believed. But on the other hand, well, half of this is good and half of it's bad. Job believed that God was a mighty creator and a stern judge. That he's a mighty creator is absolutely true. That he's a stern judge is not. He is a judge. But he's not stern in his judgment. He's just in his judgment, but he's not stern in his judgment. He does not look for the opportunity to punish. Job in this chapter, in these chapters at all, means and others. I just ran out of time when I was writing these up a while ago. But in chapter 12 particularly, Job praises the creation of God. Chapter 9, he praises the creation of God. Read those texts. There are not any two texts anywhere in the Bible better on the creation of God. I mean, he praises God's power and God's might and God's glory in his creation. But he still has a problem with God. And what is it? He doesn't believe God's merciful. He doesn't believe God cares. He believes God's his enemy. Chapter 16, verses 6 to 7. He believed God's unhearing. Chapter 19, 7 to 12. He believed God is unfindable. In chapter 23, 8 and 9. I don't know if that's a word or not, but if it isn't, we just made one up, didn't we? So there, in spite of the fact that he knows of God's greatness, he really believes that God is his enemy. In a way, he's not wrong. In a way, he's not wrong. He is wrong. But there's some truth in that statement. Because what God tells Satan, Job's chapter 2, About verse 4. If it's not, read the whole context. It's right in those first few verses. God says, Job still holds fast his integrity. Though thou hast moved me against him. You have moved me what? Against him. Now, God wasn't against him, but God's actions were what? Against him. It was against Job. He says, you have moved me against Job to destroy him without a cause. Now, it was a cause on God's part, not on Job's part. The cause was so that the devil would be proved a liar and Job would be made twice rich. But there was no cause on God's part, on Job's part in sin to explain all that. So Job thought he was his enemy. Job thought when he prayed God didn't hear. And Job thought that he couldn't find God. I said, I go to the right and he's not there. I go to the left, he's not there. I go back, he's not there. I go forward, he's not there. Where is he? Where is God? I can't find it. He forgot to look one direction, up. And he forgot to do the one thing that it takes to find God. Wait. The young man shall fail, or the youth shall fail. The young man shall utterly fail in his own strength. But they that wait for Jehovah will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings as an eagle. They will run and not be weary. They will walk and not faint. But poor old Job lived before Isaiah ever wrote that. He lived before there was a law called Moses. He lived before God started revealing His Word in written ways to people so that they could look deeper into it as they contemplated what God had said. He didn't know what you and I know about God, but he did, number 7, believe that God will ultimately right all things. He got that from his own integrity. Because would he do it? If Job had the power, and Job had the knowledge, and Job had the ability, would he right all things? Would he make all things right? Yes, he would. Wouldn't you? If you were God, and you had the ability, you had the power, you had the wisdom, you had the knowledge, wouldn't you make everything right? Job knew he would. Job said, I would do that. And since I would do that, one day God will. And so, earth, please don't cover my blood. And he's got a lot of wishes. He says, because one day my avenger of blood will stand and he will make everything right. But as he challenged his 3 friends to prove it, he also had a challenge to God. Sometimes I wish this weren't in the book, but I'm always grateful it is, because it again shows his integrity. In his great oath of clearance in chapter 31, when he's saying innocent, 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 he says, oh, that I had someone to hear me. See, he didn't believe God was hearing. He said, oh, that I had someone to hear me. So I'll write it down. Here is my indictment. There's my signature. Let the Almighty answer me. Whoo-wee. He's going to have some fun in a minute, because God always accepts that kind of challenge. Now, he's going to hang his friends because they can't prove it, but he made a mistake. Not really. Because it's in that argument with God that he'll learn what he needs to learn. Where ought mystery to drive us? From or to God? Even if we can't find him. Even if we get no, let's challenge him. You know, God doesn't mind that. Let's just challenge him. Lord, I don't understand. I want you to explain it to me, Lord. I'm going to wait, but I'm not going to wait patiently. I want an answer. You ever say that kind of thing to God? I've done that. And my blessed God has never refused to answer. Sometimes a lot later than I wished. Sometimes he said, you're not very patient, so I'll wait a while. So maybe you'll develop a little patience, or I'll give you some suffering or some affliction, so maybe you'll develop a little patience. But there's his concept of God. I wouldn't change mine for his, but I wouldn't exchange what I know about his for anything in all the world. There's his concept of God. Ultimately, he knows that God will make everything right. Then let's look at his concept of himself. Now, there's so much here, we're just going to mention it and go, all right? I hope some of you are writing some of this down, and you can look at it later. If not, I hope it's creating an impression that thrills you. In chapter 6 and verse 10, Job says, I have not denied the word I know. Now, he didn't know a lot of words. He didn't know a lot of truth from God. But he says, I have not denied what I know. He says, this will be my consolation. Yea, let me exult in pain that spareth not, that I have not denied the words of the Holy One. He said, I don't know a lot, but I'm hanging on to what I know. Isn't that what Paul said in Philippians 3, verse 16? He said, look, I want you to be perfect, but if you're not, the Lord will reveal that to you. Only to the rule you have attained, live up to it. He said, hang on to what you know. Live up to the rule you have attained, and God will give you more rule. He'll give you more stick. That's what that word rule really means. It's a measuring rod, a ruler. He said, if your ruler's only 2 inches long, measure things 2 inches at a time. Later on, it'll be 4, and it'll be 12, and it'll be 36. And then you'll have to have a deal that it rolls up inside of. You'll have such a big, long ruler. But if you've only got a 2-inch ruler, measure everything 2 inches at a time. And that's all Job had. He just had a 2-inch ruler. And he says, my joy is this, I've not denied the words of the Holy One. I put plus and minuses out here. Do you see those? That's a plus on this part, isn't it? Here comes a minus. He says, my days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. He says, I have no hope. My days pass swifter than the post. And that's not the post you're driving by in a car. That's the postman running or riding a horse. He says, my days go quicker than anything, and they're spent without any hope at all. But then he says in 9 verse 20, I am a righteous man, and I am a perfect man. The word perfect doesn't mean sinless, it means mature. Is the man right? Is he righteous? Yeah, that's what God said about him in chapter 2. Is he perfect? Yeah, that's what God said about him in chapter 2. You know it's wrong to lie? And for us to say we're not righteous is wrong. Because John says, don't let anybody deceive you. Whoever does righteousness is righteous, even as he is righteous. We're righteous by the blood of Christ. We're mature by the grace of God. Job says, I am righteous and I'm mature. That's a plus. Job said in 13 verse 16, this is my hope, that God will only slay godless men. So what was his hope? He was not godless. That God will ultimately slay only godless men. That's a plus. In chapter 13, 28, he says, I'm like a rotten, moth-eaten garment. He's getting close to the bottom there, isn't he? When he says, I am rotten and moth-eaten. He says, however, in 16 verse 17, I serve God with non-violent hands, and my prayer is pure. He had non-violent hands and a pure mouth. If a man controls his tongue, what does James say he's in control of? The whole body. So that's a plus on his part. He's not wrong, he's right. He does serve God with non-violent hands, and his prayer is pure. But then he turns and says, I'm a byword to all the community. In 17 verse 6. He says, I have no reason to live. In 17:11 and following. He said, I'm a son of worms. In chapter 17 verse 15. Now, he challenged his friends to shut up or to put up or shut up. He challenged God to a debate, and he challenges himself in chapters 29 to 31 to answer this stupidity. I mean, he is a courageous guy. He's willing to have the debate with everybody. His friends, God, and himself. In chapters 29 through 31, you have the 3 best chapters in the book to understand Job. In chapter 29, Job discusses his former condition. Now remember, this is Job's challenge to himself about his integrity and his wormhood. See, he believes himself a worm, but he knows he's a man of nonviolence, righteousness, perfection, and pure prayers. And so he's got a dilemma about himself. One side of himself, his religious side, says, Job, you are a worm and a sinner and ungodly. But his personal side, the inside of him, says, that can't be true. So what ought he to question? His religion. He ought to question his concept of God. If what you honestly, actually know about yourself is different from your theology, there's something wrong with your theology. You need to look at it again. And that's what Job is saying. In his former condition, we're not going to take time to study it, but there are 5 points in chapter 29. He is a God-preserved man, 1 to 4. He is domestic, sounds like chapter 1 and 2 again, doesn't he? He is a God-preserved man, verse 1 and 4. He's domestically happy, verse 5. He's prosperous, verse 6. He's universally respected by everybody, 7:10 and 21 to 25. And he's benevolently effective in verses 11 to 20. I really love that one. Read that tonight sometime and see Job say that there never was an orphan in all of his acquaintance that went shoeless. There never was a widow in all of his city and all of his domain that didn't have clothes and food. And no stranger ever slept in the street. A sobering question that we asked ourselves last night, and for the benefit of those that were not here, I think you need to be sobered too. We ask ourselves this question: if we were to lose all of our wealth, how many orphans' feet would be cold, and widows' bellies would be hungry, and strangers would have to sleep on cold stone slabs because we no longer had the money to take care of them? That's a sobering question, isn't it? Job says, find one and I'm judged. Because he had the money to relieve everyone in his city. He didn't have the money to relieve everyone in the world. But he had enough money to relieve every orphan, every widow, and every traveler in his city. And they could share his beds and his food and his clothes while they came through. That was his former condition. He says, now, am I being punished for this? That's my past life. And he's telling the truth. He's not no smoke screen. Not a bit of smoke screen here. Maybe a little pride, because God will convict him of a little pride. But this is the truth. And so he's asking his friends, as Jesus did, for which good work that I've done are you about to stone me? You remember that in John 10? Job says, for which one of these good works is God laying all this affliction on me? And then he talks about his present curse. He's hated by his peers. That's chapter 30, his present curse. He's hated by his peers. Young men whose fathers were not even worthy to eat with his dogs, he says, has him in derision. They mock at him, they jeer at him, they spit at him. He's hated by his peers. He is tortured by disease. He said, my skin is black. We've already talked about this. It made us sick the first time. My skin is black and falls off my bones. Worms and maggots eat me. I can't close my eyelids. I've got fever that makes me delirious. Nobody is here to help me. And then he says he's cut off by God. He says there was a time that God and I walked hand in hand, as good friends do, through flowered fields. But now he shoots arrows in me, and he tortures me. He's not altogether wrong. He's not altogether wrong. God's doing that. He can take it too, can't he? Job has the ability to bear it too, doesn't he? Then in chapter 31, you have his oath of clearance. In chapter 29, he says, here's the way it used to be. Here's the way it is. I am untainted. I am an innocent person. I'm untainted by, and I'm going to uncover them all because we don't really have a lot of time left. He said, I'm untainted by immorality. Find one time that I, even with my eye, hankered after another man's wife. He said, I'm untainted by thoughtlessness. Find one person that had a need I didn't meet. He says, I'm untainted by covetousness. Search and find where I stored my goods to my neighbor's harm. He says, I'm untainted by even a hankering toward idolatry. I don't even want to worship power. I don't even want to worship money or position or prestige or popularity. I don't want to worship any of those things. I don't even have a hidden desire to do that. He says, I'm untainted by any bitterness toward my enemies. That one hurts, doesn't it? He says, I'm untainted by any insincerity. I've never said something with a smile when I really wanted to frown. He says, I'm untainted by any dishonesty. No man's wages were ever withheld a day by me. My field was not misused. He says, and I love that one. He says, I never misused my field. If I've done that, if I've abused my cattle or abused my field or abused my laborer, then my arm ought to be torn from its socket and ought to be beaten to death with it. He basically says that. And remember that there's a challenge. There's my signature. I want the Almighty to answer this. I want the Almighty to prove I'm guilty of any of those. God said, that's beside the point. Aren't most of our arguments with God beside the point? He said, that's all beside the point. Agreed, 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 agreed. Now, are you going to make me unrighteous so you can be righteous? That's God's statement to Job, God's question of Job. He doesn't try to convict Job of any sin. He just any of those sins. He just tries to convict Job of the pride that went before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall that would question the integrity and the righteousness of God. God said in chapter 40, verses 3 and following, He said, will you even annul my righteousness? Will you make me unrighteous so you can still be righteous? I'm still waiting for someone to convict Job of any of those sins. Even the Almighty couldn't do that. A couple of more points. I should stop right there, but I've got about 7 minutes and I'm going to use them. So maybe tomorrow night we can get on with God's answer to all this. I want you to notice His concept of the aftergrave. I want you to remember that He doesn't say always what's right. God said that Himself when He appeared on the scene in chapter 38. And the three friends didn't do as good as he did. I'm going to uncover all this and let you look at it. We may talk about this more tomorrow night. What did Job believe would happen when he died? I know most of us maybe have not even thought of this, so I won't read a verse or two of this. In chapter 7, verse 9 and 10, Job says, but as the cloud is consumed and vanishes away, so he that goes down to Sheol shall come up no more. He shall return no more to his house, neither shall his place know him anymore. Job believed when you died, you were dead all over like the dog rover. He thought there was absolutely no afterlife. Now, that was his consistent thought. He dreamed, as even atheists have dreamed, of something other than that. You know, atheists have dreamed of heaven, not even believing in God. Robert Ingersoll at his brother Charles' grave said, life is a narrow veil that runs between the cold and barren peaks of two eternities. We strive in vain to look beyond the heights. We cry aloud, and the only answer is the echo of our own wailing cry. But in the night, hope sees a star, and listening, love can hear the rust of the wing. He who sleeps here, mistaking the approach of death for the return of health, whispered with his latest breath, I'm better now. Let us hope that in spite of all of our doubts and fears and tears and dogmas, that these beautiful words are true of all the countless dead. And the next night he preached on the mistake of Moses. Job will dream of an afterlife and in the next breath say, but I go to the place from whence I shall not return. In chapter 10 he says it's a place of darkness, whose light is as midnight, where there is no life nor calling of God to mind. In chapter 14, 7 to 10, he says a tree is cut down and a man is cut down. There's hope for the tree if you pour water on it, but there's no hope for the man. That's what he said. He was wrong. That's what he said. He said in 17:4-6, my destiny is the same as the worm, because I'm son of the worm. The worm is my father and the worm is my mother, and I'll go to where the worm goes. That's what he believed. He said in 7 verse 6, my days are swifter than the weaver's shuttle and are spent without hope. In spite of all of that, he had faith in his vindication. He believed that on earth, his good name would be vindicated, and that'd be enough for him. He didn't have to have an afterlife. If just on earth, his good name was vindicated. He said in 7:21, God will look for me. He says, and why dost thou not pardon my transgression and take away mine iniquity? For now shall I lie down in the dust, and thou wilt seek me diligently, but I shall not be. He said, God, you better watch out. You're laying too much on me, and I'm going to die, and you're going to come down and say, where's Job? I'm looking for Job. Where's Job? And they're going to say, he's dead. He's buried. Dead? He shouldn't have died. I'm down here looking for him. That's what Job believed. I like it. I like it. He says to God in chapter 14, 13, and 15, he said, if you would just appoint me a day, if you just say, you know, out here in the year 40,020, you're going to call me up, and we're going to talk about it, and you're going to see that you were wrong, and that I was a righteous man. If you will just appoint me a day, then I will spend all of my days without complaint. But since you haven't, hear my complaint. And he does complain to God. He says in chapter 16, 17, verse 2, and it's only about that much in your Bible, it's not much text. He said, O earth, earth, cover not my blood. Why? my witness will come. He said, I have a witness. I don't know who it is, where he is, what he is, but he's going to come because I'm a righteous man, and righteous men have witnesses. And he's going to come, and I want that blood to still be on the ground, red. So he can say, whose blood is that? They'll say, that's Job's blood. He said, Job shouldn't have had to shed his blood. He was a righteous man. And that'll be all Job wants. I wish that's all I wanted sometimes. He says in 19:23-29, my avenger of blood will come. He says, I know that my Goel, my avenger of blood. That's a much better translation than Redeemer. Redeemer starts calling up salvation to our mind. The word Goel is never used in the Old Testament for salvation. It's always used for vindication. So he says, I know my avenger, my vindicator will come. Someone will come one day to say, okay, everybody gather around. I want to talk about Job. Job was a good, righteous man. And that'll be enough for Job. Boy, he has great faith in 23 verse 10. He looks God right in the face, and the greatest leap of faith in all the books says, when you have tried me, I will come forth like gold. He says, my Redeemer will come, my Avenger will come, I will come. Out of all of this trial, I will come like gold. So, he says, the only thing I know to do while waiting all that is argue with God. He said, and I won't talk about this tomorrow in the introduction, and then we'll talk about God's answer when he argues. He says, I will argue with God. Now what I need is an umpire. In 9 verse 23 and 25, he says there is no umpire to stand between us. No guy, no person to put one hand on Job and one hand on God and say, Job, meet God. God, meet Job. Now argue. That's all he wanted. He says in this next verse, I know it will kill me. Nobody sees God and lives. I know I will die, but I'll be cleared. God will say, I just didn't know that, Job. I'm sorry. You're a righteous man. He says, I'll be cleared somewhat. I'll die. Nobody sees God and live, but I'd rather die cleared than live in this doubt. I want to see God. Matter of fact, he said, I would argue with God if I could find him. We've already talked about that verse. I go to the right, the left, back, forward, everywhere, can't find him. He says in 13 verse 20, oh Lord, please let me talk to you. Just do two things for me and let me talk to you. Don't make me afraid when I'm standing there, and don't let me forget what I want to say. He said, just let me come there and argue. And remember, in the background of all of that is the fact that he's challenged God to a debate. The three friends, I know, thought that lightning's about to come, a heretic talking like this, a blasphemer talking like this, lightning's about to come, and they're not far wrong, because yonder it is. I mean, lightning is booming, thunder is booming, and lightning is flashing, and that old snake of a tornado comes down out of the cloud, and Elihu, the sure sophomore, goes over the hill, and Bildad, Eliphaz, and Zophar go into the cave, and Job turns to meet God, got his nose out, ready to argue, ready to debate with God. He doesn't care whether God takes the affirmative and he the negative, or he takes the affirmative and God takes the negative. He doesn't care. Lord, come, let's argue, and we'll cover that tomorrow.